looks pretty happy. She's doing the job. She's very much in red. You know, it's interesting. Ever since Nancy Reagan, the willingness or the readiness of women to wear these bright, look at it right now. There's a wonderful look as we go in there. All the red there, that's people who want to get on television tonight. And you see the woman up there in the gallery, the First Lady, of course, with the red. Ironic. So much red.
And ironic, the meaning of red, of course, in our 21st century politics, there's a lot less red in the chamber than there was the last time we had one of these.
What did you mean by that?
The symbolic red, now that we have a Democratic control.
Oh, that's right. How did the Democrats ever get blue, which is the most desirable color to get in a country that's still in the aftermath of the Cold War?
This has been studied at length, as you know. There are people getting PhDs somewhere trying to figure out exactly when it turned. And we've got 4 Supreme Court justices tonight.
There's John Roberts, the chief.
In full regalia.
Kennedy and Breyer and Alito. And that other fellow I don't think is a Supreme Court judge.
If he is, he did not get a robe.
He didn't get the name brand. This is really great. You know, Steve Breyer, who was down there this weekend with the Carter reunion, he was a former staffer on the Hill. And one of the reasons he comes regularly to these occasions, and they all choose to come, is because of his loyalty to the legislative branch of government, which is a good thing to be loyal to, in fact, under our Constitution.
Madam Speaker, the President's Cabinet.
And as the Cabinet enters, we are delighted to be joined, as we see Secretary Rice leading the crew, by the anchor emeritus of NBC Nightly News, our esteemed colleague, Tom Brokaw, who's at headquarters in New York. Tom, can you recall circumstances under which, since certainly the Clinton time, when we've had a more bizarre set of symbols and a more fractious set of political circumstances around a State of the Union address?
Well, Keith, you have to remember that I was White House correspondent during Watergate. That was a pretty traumatic time for the president at that time, Richard Nixon, and a very hostile Congress dominated by the Democrats then as well. Jimmy Carter had some difficult times during the capture of the American hostages in Iran, when he had an energy crisis that was not getting solved. So every president at one time or another has had a difficult time, but this president has had 6 State of the Unions in a row in which he's had the home field advantage. Tonight he enters this arena, and it's not his home field. It's dominated, as you have been saying all night long, by the opposition. And at the same time, based on what we know he's going to talk about tonight, one of his principal problems will be on the Republican side of the aisle, because he's going to talk about some issues tonight, and in a way that a lot of Republicans are not happy, including immigration and energy, certainly. But the dark cloud hanging over this arena tonight will be Iraq, not just in that hall, but outside the hall as well. The president is coming in here in his penultimate State of the Union address with a 2-to-1 disadvantage in the polls. That's tough to overcome with just one speech.
Tom, what did you make of the fact that John McCain, the man who many people believe is the best bet to replace the president, directing his attack personally in a new article today in the press today, that the vice president, he said, is guilty of giving the president a witch's brew of bad advice. He's holding Cheney accountable for being the bad consigliere to the president with regard to the war.
Well, I think it's a commentary. This comes from within the Republican Party, but it's a commentary on the kind of difficult task that the president has before him with 2 more years to run. He's got a Congress dominated by the Democrats. He's got a lot of Republicans who are now running to save their own life, not just presidential candidates, but more than 20 senators who will be up for election in 2008 as well. It's unfair to call him a lame duck at this stage, but he's been winged severely as he comes into this hall and tries to make his presidency fly again.
How much of a bump can he get? Can he, first of all, even more preliminary to that, Tom, can he change the subject from Iraq, at least on the front pages and on, for example, the Today Show tomorrow? Can he shift the public topic?
I don't think that he can. I think when you're spending American blood and treasure in a war that has not gone well, even by the White House admission, by the president's own admission, that will be a constant presence in this chamber tonight. Some of the initiatives that he will talk about, global warming will be mentioned for the first time in the 7 years that he's been there. That will get some encouraging reception, my guess is, from the Democrats and across this country. But the big issue remains Iraq, Iraq, Iraq. And especially, I think it might have been a kind of a tipping point this week when Senator John Warner no one with better Republican credentials than he has, the former chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, had a bipartisan alliance that he went public with to introduce a resolution being very critical of the president's plan to add extra troops.
President will be in a moment, of course, introduced by the Sergeant at Arms of the House. Tom, can anything get done in this country if Iraq is not going to be addressed and resolved to some degree?
Oh, I think that the White House, somebody at the White House said today, we have a better shot at getting an immigration bill through with the Democrats in charge than we did with the Republicans. That may happen. The Democrats also recognize that they can't sit on their hands when it comes to health care. When I asked a very prominent Democrat today whether the president's plan for moving some taxes around as a way to address health care was a non-starter, he said, no, it's not a non-starter. This is what they're doing in the states. We just like to have more of the needs of the very poor people in this country addressed. So I do think on health care, on energy, and on immigration, there's a chance that something may get done in the next 2 years because the Democrats can't be a do-nothing Congress either as they go into 2008.
Let me ask you about the strategy here. Can the president govern using a majority of Democrats, or does he get required at some point to win over a majority of his own congressional colleagues? For example, can he put an immigration bill together, which largely depends on a majority of Democrats who are more liberal on the issue and skirts around the more conservative Republican caucus?
Yeah, I think that he can. Again, talking to some of the Democrats on the Hill today, one of the areas in which they think they can work with him is on reforming No Child Left Behind. They believe that he's generally right with his goals in reforming American public education, but now after 7 years they agree that it does need some reforms, some retooling, if you will, and they think that they can work with him on that. So there are a number of issues that he probably can find some common ground with the Democrats on, but I dare say stylistically and tonally the White House is going to have to change, and I think you should look for that at the beginning tonight. The president's demeanor and how he acknowledges the new Speaker of the House, his whole change. In the past, it's been pretty much I talk, you listen, because he had a captive Congress, if you will.
Madam Speaker.
Here now is the president.
The President of the United States.
President of the United States. All right. Just had a prayer with Kirby John Carter. How you doing? Madam Chair. Oh, no. All right. Mr. Barrett. I'm blessed. How are you? Give your son a
The people you'll notice who are greeting the president most effusively have waited for hours in many cases to claim those very privileged seats right along the aisle there. This isn't by accident that these people are the ones who get on national television now to embrace the president.
And what we were able to eavesdrop on from one of them, as you heard, I'm sure, as we see the president greeting Mrs. Dole, saying a prayer for your success. That might be metaphoric. Minority Leader Boehner, just behind the president, has not been his best friend this week. Perhaps that's symbolic, too. We're looking for images like we're casting a Hollywood picture, Chris. Mr. Boehner suggested this week we needed a committee not unlike what Abraham Lincoln faced during the Civil War, a committee on the conduct of the war with the president to report every 30 days on the progress of events.
You know, you must wonder watching this, does the president only see these people once a year? It looks like high school kids greeting each other at their favorite summer resort, as if they hadn't seen each other in years or months, when in fact he does business with a lot of these folks, obviously the cabinet members, on a weekly or daily basis. There it is, that great picture, the Vice President of the United States, the Speaker of the House, different parties, different genders, different apparel, obviously. So much a contrast.
And that historic handshake, Tom, there it is, the woman Speaker of the House. Extraordinary moment, is it not?
What's he thinking?
How you doing? Thank you. Ready to go? Ready to go?
Welcome, Mr. President. You want to with me? I am.
Okay, let's do it.
Members of Congress, I have the high privilege and the distinct honor of presenting to you the President of the United States.
Thank you, Peter. Go ahead. Thank you very much. And tonight I have the high privilege and distinct honor of my own as the first president to begin the State of the Union message with these words: Madam Speaker. In his day, the late Congressman Thomas D'Alessandro Jr. from Baltimore, Maryland, saw Presidents Roosevelt and Truman at this rostrum. But nothing could compare with the sight of his only daughter, Nancy, presiding tonight as Speaker of the House of Representatives. Congratulations, Madam Speaker. Congratulations. Two members of the House and Senate are not with us tonight, and we pray for the recovery and speedy return of Senator Tim Johnson and Congressman Charlie Norwood. Madam Speaker, Vice President Cheney, members of Congress, distinguished guests, and fellow citizens, the rite of custom brings us together at a defining hour when decisions are hard and courage is needed. We enter the year 2007 with large endeavors underway and others that are ours to begin. In all of this, much is asked of us. We must have the will to face difficult challenges and determined enemies, and the wisdom to face them together. Some in this chamber are new to the House and the Senate, and I congratulate the Democrat majority. Congress has changed, but not our responsibilities. Each of us is guided by our own convictions, and to these we must stay faithful. Yet we're all held to the same standards and called to serve the same good purposes, to extend this nation's prosperity, to spend the people's money wisely, to solve problems, not leave them to future generations, to guard America against all evil, and to keep faith with those we have sent forth to defend us. We're not the first to come here with a government divided and uncertainty in the air. Like many before us, we can work through our differences, and we can achieve big things for the American people. Our citizens don't much care which side of the aisle we sit on, as long as we're willing to cross that aisle when there's work to be done. Our job is to make life better for our fellow Americans and to help them build a future of hope and opportunity, and this is the business before us tonight. A future of hope and opportunity begins with a growing economy, and that is what we have. We're now in the 41st month of uninterrupted job growth, a recovery that has created 7.2 million new jobs so far. Unemployment is low. Inflation is low. Wages are rising. This economy is on the move, and our job is to keep it that way, not with more government, but with more enterprise. Next week, I'll deliver a full report on the state of our economy. Tonight, I want to discuss 3 economic reforms that deserve to be priorities for this Congress. First, we must balance the federal budget. We can do so without raising taxes. What we need is spending discipline in Washington, D.C. We set a goal of cutting the deficit in half by 2009 and met that goal 3 years ahead of schedule. Now let us take the next step. In the coming weeks, I will submit a budget that eliminates the federal deficit within the next 5 years. I ask you to make the same commitment. Together we can restrain the spending appetite of the federal government, and we can balance the federal budget. Next, there's the matter of earmarks. These special interest items are often slipped into bills at the last hour, when not even C-SPAN is watching. In 2005 alone, the number of earmarks grew to over 13,000 and totaled nearly $18 billion. Even worse, over 90% of the earmarks never make it to the floor of the House and the Senate. They're dropped into committee reports that are not even part of the bill that arrives on my desk. You didn't vote them into law. I didn't sign them into law. Yet they are treated as if they have the force of law. The time has come to end this practice. So let us work together to reform the budget process, expose every earmark to the light of day and to a vote in Congress, and cut the number and cost of earmarks at least in half by the end of this session. And finally, to keep this economy strong, we must take on the challenge of entitlements. Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid are commitments of conscience, and so it is our duty to keep them permanently sound. Yet we're failing in that duty. And this failure will one day leave our children with 3 bad options: huge tax increases, huge deficits, or huge and immediate cuts in benefits. Everyone in this chamber knows this to be true, yet somehow we have not found it in ourselves to act. So let us work together and do it now. With enough good sense and goodwill, you and I can fix Medicare and Medicaid and save Social Security. Spreading opportunity and hope in America also requires public schools that give children the knowledge and character they need in life. 5 years ago, we rose above partisan differences to pass the No Child Left Behind Act, preserving local control, raising standards, and holding schools accountable for results. And because we acted, students are performing better in reading and math, and minority students are closing the achievement gap. Now the task is to build on this success without watering down standards, without taking control from local communities, and without backsliding and calling it reform. We can lift student achievement even higher by giving local leaders flexibility to turn around failing schools, and by giving families with children stuck in failing schools the right to choose someplace better. We must increase funds for students who struggle and make sure these children get the special help they need. And we can make sure our children are prepared for the jobs of the future and our country is more competitive by strengthening math and science skills. The No Child Left Behind Act has worked for America's children, and I ask Congress to reauthorize this good law. A future of hope and opportunity requires that all our citizens have affordable and available health care. When it comes to health care, government has an obligation to care for the elderly, the disabled, and poor children, and we will meet those responsibilities. For all other Americans, private health insurance is the best way to meet their needs. But many Americans cannot afford a health insurance policy. And so tonight I propose two new initiatives to help more Americans afford their own insurance. First, I propose a standard tax deduction for health insurance that will be like the standard tax deduction for dependents. Families with health insurance will pay no income on payroll tax or payroll taxes on $15,000 of their income. Single Americans with health insurance will pay no income or payroll taxes on $7,500 of their income. With this reform, more than 100 million men, women, and children who are now covered by employer-provided insurance will benefit from lower tax bills. At the same time, this reform will level the playing field for those who do not get health insurance through their job. For Americans who now purchase health insurance on their own, this proposal would mean a substantial tax savings. $4,500 for a family of four making $60,000 a year. And for the millions of other Americans who have no health insurance at all, this deduction would help put a basic private health insurance plan within their reach. Changing the tax code is a vital and necessary step to making health care affordable for more Americans. My second proposal is to help the states that are coming up with innovative ways to cover the uninsured. States that make basic private health insurance available to all their citizens should receive federal funds to help them provide this coverage to the poor and the sick. I've asked the Secretary of Health and Human Services to work with Congress to take existing federal funds and use them to create affordable choices grants. These grants would give our nation's governors more money and more flexibility to get private health insurance to those most in need. There are many other ways that Congress can help. We need to expand health savings accounts. We need to help small businesses through association health plans. We need to reduce costs and medical errors with better information technology. we will encourage price transparency, and to protect good doctors from junk lawsuits, we need to pass medical liability reform. In all we do, we must remember that the best health care decisions are not made by government and insurance companies, but by patients and their doctors. Extending hope and opportunity in our country requires an immigration system worthy of America, with laws that are fair and borders that are secure. When laws and borders are routinely violated, this harms the interests of our country. To secure our border, we're doubling the size of the Border Patrol and funding new infrastructure and technology. Yet even with all these steps, we cannot fully secure the border unless we take pressure off the border. And that requires a temporary worker program. We should establish a legal and orderly path for foreign workers to enter our country to work on a temporary basis. As a result, they won't have to try to sneak in. And that will leave border agents free to chase down drug smugglers and criminals and terrorists. We'll enforce our immigration laws at the work site and give employers the tools to verify the legal status of their workers, so there's no excuse left for violating the law. We need to uphold the great tradition of the melting pot that assimilates new arrivals. We need to resolve the status of the illegal immigrants who are already in our country without animosity and without amnesty. Convictions run deep in this capital when it comes to immigration. Let us have a serious, civil, and conclusive debate so that you can pass and I can sign comprehensive immigration reform into law. Extending hope and opportunity depends on a stable supply of energy that keeps America's economy running and America's environment clean. For too long, our nation has been dependent on foreign oil. And this dependence leaves us more vulnerable to hostile regimes and to terrorists who could cause huge disruptions of oil shipments and raise the price of oil and do great harm to our economy. It's in our vital interest to diversify America's energy supply. The way forward is through technology. We must continue changing the way America generates electric power by even greater use of clean coal technology, solar and wind energy, and clean, safe nuclear power. We need to press on with battery research for plug-in and hybrid vehicles and expand the use of clean diesel vehicles and biodiesel fuel. We must continue investing in new methods of producing ethanol. Using everything from wood chips to grasses to agricultural wastes. We made a lot of progress thanks to good policies here in Washington and the strong response of the market. And now even more dramatic advances are within reach. Tonight I ask Congress to join me in pursuing a great goal. Let us build on the work we've done and reduce gasoline usage in the United States by 20% in the next 10 years. When we do that, we will have cut our total imports by the equivalent of 3/4 of all the oil we now import from the Middle East. To reach this goal, we must increase the supply of alternative fuels by setting a mandatory fuel standard to require 35 billion gallons of renewable and alternative fuels in 2017, and that is nearly 5 times the current target. At the same time, we need to reform and modernize fuel economy standards for cars the way we did for light trucks, and conserve up to 8.5 billion more gallons of gasoline by 2017. Achieving these ambitious goals will dramatically reduce our dependence on foreign oil, but it's not going to eliminate it. And so as we continue to diversify our fuel supply, we must step up domestic oil production in environmentally sensitive ways. And to further protect America against severe disruptions to our oil supply, I ask Congress to double the current capacity of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. America is on the verge of technological breakthroughs that will enable us to live our lives less dependent on oil. And these technologies will help us be better stewards of the environment, and they will help us to confront the serious challenge of global climate change. A future of hope and opportunity requires a fair, impartial system of justice. The lives of our citizens across our nation are affected by the outcome of cases pending in our federal courts. We have a shared obligation to ensure that the federal courts have enough judges to hear those cases and deliver timely rulings. As President, I have a duty to nominate qualified men and women to vacancies on the federal bench, and the United States Senate has a duty as well to give those nominees a fair hearing and a prompt up or down vote on the Senate floor. For all of us in this room, there's no higher responsibility than to protect the people of this country from danger. 5 years have come and gone since we saw the scenes and felt the sorrow that the terrorists can cause. We've had time to take stock of our situation. We've added many critical protections to guard the homeland. We know with certainty that the horrors of that September morning were just a glimpse of what the terrorists intend for us, unless we stop them. With the distance of time, we find ourselves debating the causes of conflict and the course we have followed. Such debates are essential when a great democracy faces great questions. And one question has surely been settled, that to win the war on terror, we must take the fight to the enemy. From the start, America and our allies have protected our people by staying on the offense. The enemy knows that the days of comfortable sanctuary, easy movement, steady financing, and free-flowing communications are long over. For the terrorists, life since 9/11 has never been the same. Our success in this war is often measured by the things that did not happen. We cannot know the full extent of the attacks that we and our allies have prevented. But here's some of what we do know. We stopped an al-Qaeda plot to fly a hijacked airplane into the tallest building on the West Coast. We broke up a Southeast Asian terrorist cell grooming operatives for attacks inside the United States. We uncovered an al-Qaeda cell developing anthrax to be used in attacks against America. And just last August, British authorities uncovered a plot to blow up passenger planes bound for America over the Atlantic Ocean. For each life saved, we owe a debt of gratitude to the brave public servants who devote their lives to finding the terrorists and stopping them. Every success against the terrorists is a reminder of the shoreless ambitions of this enemy. The evil that inspired and rejoiced in 9/11 is still at work in the world. And so long as that's the case, America is still a nation at war. In the mind of the terrorists, this war began well before September the 11th and will not end until their radical vision is fulfilled. And these past 5 years have given us a much clearer view of the nature of this enemy. Al-Qaeda and its followers are Sunni extremists, possessed by hatred and commanded by a harsh and narrow ideology. Take almost any principle of civilization, and their goal is the opposite. They preach with threats, instruct with bullets and bombs, and promise paradise for the murder of the innocent. Our enemies are quite explicit about their intentions. They want to overthrow moderate governments and establish safe havens from which to plan and carry out new attacks on our country. By killing and terrorizing Americans, they want to force our country to retreat from the world and abandon the cause of liberty. They would then be free to impose their will and spread their totalitarian ideology. Listen to this warning from the late terrorist Zarqawi. We will sacrifice our blood and bodies to put an end to your dreams. And what is coming is even worse. Osama bin Laden declared death is better than living on this earth with the unbelievers among us. These men are not given idle words, and they are just one camp in the Islamist radical movement. In recent times, it has also become clear that we face an escalating danger from Shia extremists who are just as hostile to America and are also determined to dominate the Middle East. Many are known to take direction from the regime in Iran, which is funding and arming terrorists like Hezbollah, a group second only to Al-Qaeda in the American lives it has taken. The Shia and Sunni extremists are different faces of the same totalitarian threat. Whatever slogans they chant, when they slaughter the innocent, they have the same wicked purposes. They want to kill Americans, kill democracy in the Middle East, and gain the weapons to kill on an even more horrific scale. In the 6 years since our nation was attacked, I wish I could report to you that the dangers have ended. They have not. And so it remains the policy of this government to use every lawful and proper tool of intelligence, diplomacy, law enforcement, and military action to do our duty to find these enemies and to protect the American people. This war is more than a clash of arms. It is a decisive ideological struggle, and the security of our nation is in the balance. To prevail, we must remove the conditions that inspire blind hatred and drove 19 men to get onto airplanes and to come and kill us. What every terrorist fears most is human freedom. Societies where men and women make their own choices, answer to their own conscience, and live by their hopes instead of their resentments. Free people are not drawn to violent and malignant ideologies, and most will choose a better way when they're given a chance. So we advance our own security interests by helping moderates and reformers and brave voices for democracy. The great question of our day is whether America will help men and women in the Middle East to build free societies and share in the rights of all humanity. And I say, for the sake of our own security, we must. In the last 2 years, we've seen the desire for liberty in the broader Middle East, and we have been sobered by the enemy's fierce reaction. In 2005, the world watched as the citizens of Lebanon raised the banner of the Cedar Revolution. They drove out the Syrian occupiers and chose new leaders in free elections. In 2005, the people of Afghanistan defied the terrorists and elected a democratic legislature. And in 2005, the Iraqi people held 3 national elections, choosing a transitional government, adopting the most progressive democratic constitution in the Arab world, and then electing a government under that constitution. Despite endless threats from the killers in their midst, nearly 12 million Iraqi citizens came out to vote in a show of hope and solidarity that we should never forget. A thinking enemy watched all these scenes, adjusted their tactics, and in 2006 they struck back. In Lebanon, assassins took the life of Pierre Gemayel, a prominent participant in the Cedar Revolution. Hezbollah terrorists with support from Syria and Iran sowed conflict in the region and are seeking to undermine Lebanon's legitimately elected government. In Afghanistan, Taliban and al-Qaeda fighters tried to regain power by regrouping and engaging Afghan and NATO forces. In Iraq, al-Qaeda and other Sunni extremists blew up one of the most sacred places in Shia Islam, the Golden Mosque of Samarra. This atrocity, directed at a Muslim house of prayer, was designed to provoke retaliation from Iraqi Shia, and it succeeded. Radical Shia elements, some of whom received support from Iran, formed death squads. The result was a tragic escalation of sectarian rage and reprisal that continues to this day. This is not the fight we entered in Iraq, but it is the fight we are in. Every one of us wishes this war were over and won. Yet it would not be like us to leave our promises unkept, our friends abandoned, and our own security at risk. Ladies and gentlemen, on this day, at this hour, it is still within our power to shape the outcome of this battle. Let us find our resolve and turn events toward victory. We're carrying out a new strategy in Iraq, a plan that demands more from Iraq's elected government and gives our forces in Iraq the reinforcements they need to complete their mission. Our goal is a democratic Iraq that upholds the rule of law, respects the rights of its people, provides them security, and is an ally in the war on terror. In order to make progress toward this goal, the Iraqi government must stop the sectarian violence in its capital. But the Iraqis are not yet ready to do this on their own. So we're deploying reinforcements of more than 20,000 additional soldiers and Marines to Iraq. The vast majority will go to Baghdad, where they will help Iraqi forces to clear and secure neighborhoods and serve as advisors embedded in Iraqi army units. With Iraqis in the lead, our forces will help secure the city by chasing down the terrorists, insurgents, and the roaming death squads. And in Anbar province, where al-Qaeda terrorists have gathered and local forces have begun showing a willingness to fight them, we're sending an additional 4,000 United States Marines with orders to find the terrorists and clear them out. We didn't drive al-Qaeda out of their safe haven in Afghanistan, only to let them set up a new safe haven in a free Iraq. People of Iraq want to live in peace, and now it's time for their government to act. Iraq's leaders know that our commitment is not open-ended. They have promised to deploy more of their own troops to secure Baghdad, and they must do so. They pledge that they will confront violent radicals of any faction or political party, and they need to follow through and lift needless restrictions on Iraqi and coalition forces so these troops can achieve their mission of bringing security to all of the people of Baghdad. Iraq's leaders have committed themselves to a series of benchmarks to achieve reconciliation, to share oil revenues among all Iraq citizens, to put the wealth of Iraq into the rebuilding of Iraq, to allow more Iraqis to re-enter their nation's civic life, to hold local elections, and to take responsibility for security in every Iraqi province. But for all this to happen, Baghdad must be secure. And our plan will help the Iraqi government take back its capital and make good on its commitments. My fellow citizens, our military commanders and I have carefully weighed the options, discussed every possible approach. In the end, I chose this course of action because it provides the best chance for success. Many in this chamber understand that America must not fail in Iraq, because you understand that the consequences of failure would be grievous and far-reaching. If American forces step back before Baghdad is secure, the Iraqi government would be overrun by extremists on all sides. We could expect an epic battle between Shia extremists backed by Iran and Sunni extremists aided by al-Qaeda and supporters of the old regime. A contagion of violence could spill out across the country, and in time, the entire region could be drawn into the conflict. For America, this is a nightmare scenario. For the enemy, this is the objective. Chaos is the greatest ally, their greatest ally in this struggle. And out of chaos in Iraq would emerge an emboldened enemy with new safe havens, new recruits, new resources, and an even greater determination to harm America. To allow this to happen would be to ignore the lessons of September the 11th and invite tragedy. Ladies and gentlemen, nothing is more important at this moment in our history than for America to succeed in the Middle East, to succeed in Iraq, and to spare the American people from this danger. This is where matters stand tonight, in the here and now. I've spoken with many of you in person. I respect you and the arguments you've made. We went into this largely united in our assumptions and in our convictions. And whatever you voted for, you did not vote for failure. Our country is pursuing a new strategy in Iraq, and I ask you to give it a chance to work. And I ask you to support our troops in the field and those on their way. The war on terror we fight today is a generational struggle that will continue long after you and I have turned our duties over to others. And that's why it's important to work together so our nation can see this great effort through. Both parties and both branches should work in close consultation. So I've proposed to establish a special advisory council on the war on terror, made up of leaders in Congress from both political parties. We will share ideas for how to position America to meet every challenge that confronts us. We'll show our enemies abroad that we're united in the goal of victory. And one of the first steps we can take together is to add to the ranks of our military so that the American armed forces are ready for all the challenges ahead. Tonight, I ask the Congress to authorize an increase in the size of our active Army and Marine Corps by 92,000 in the next 5 years. Second task we can take on together is to design and establish a volunteer civilian reserve corps. Such a corps would function much like our military reserve. It would ease the burden on the armed forces by allowing us to hire civilians with critical skills to serve on missions abroad when America needs them. It would give people across America who do not wear the uniform a chance to serve in the defining struggle of our time. Americans can have confidence in the outcome of this struggle because we're not in this struggle alone. We have a diplomatic strategy that is rallying the world to join in the fight against extremism. In Iraq, multinational forces are operating under a mandate from the United Nations. We're working with Jordan and Saudi Arabia and Egypt and the Gulf states to increase support for Iraq's government. The United Nations has imposed sanctions on Iran and made it clear that the world will not allow the regime in Tehran to acquire nuclear weapons. Other members of the quartet, the UN, the EU, and Russia were pursuing diplomacy to help bring peace to the Holy Land and pursuing the establishment of a democratic Palestinian state living side by side with Israel in peace and security. In Afghanistan, NATO has taken the lead in turning back the Taliban and al-Qaeda offensive, the first time the alliance has deployed forces outside the North Atlantic area. Together with our partners in China and Japan, Russia, and South Korea, we're pursuing intensive diplomacy to achieve a Korean peninsula free of nuclear weapons. We will continue to speak out for the cause of freedom in places like Cuba, Belarus, and Burma, and continue to awaken the conscience of the world to save the people of Darfur. American foreign policy is more than a matter of war and diplomacy. Our work in the world is also based on a timeless truth: to whom much is given, much is required. We hear the call to take on the challenges of hunger and poverty and disease, and that is precisely what America is doing. We must continue to fight HIV/AIDS, especially on the continent of Africa. Because you funded the emergency plan for AIDS relief, the number of people receiving life-saving drugs has grown from 50,000 to more than 800,000 in 3 short years. I ask you to continue funding our efforts to fight HIV/AIDS, and I ask you to provide $1.2 billion over 5 years so we can combat malaria in 15 African countries. I ask that you fund the Millennium Challenge account so that American aid reaches the people who need it in nations where democracy is on the rise and corruption is in retreat. And let us continue to support the expanded trade and debt relief that are the best hope for lifting lives and eliminating poverty. When America serves others in this way, we show the strength and generosity of our country. These deeds reflect the character of our people. The greatest strength we have is the heroic kindness and courage and self-sacrifice of the American people. You see this spirit often if you know where to look. And tonight, we need only look above to the gallery. Dikembe Mutombo grew up in Africa amid great poverty and disease. He came to Georgetown University on a scholarship to study medicine. Coach John Thompson took a look at Dikembe and had a different idea. Dikembe became a star in the NBA and a citizen of the United States. But he never forgot the land of his birth or the duty to share his blessings with others. He built a brand new hospital in his old hometown. A friend has said of this good-hearted man, Matumbo believes that God has given him this opportunity to do great things. And we're proud to call this son of the Congo a citizen of the United States of America. After her daughter was born, Julie Agner Clark searched for ways to share her love of music and art with her child. So she borrowed some equipment and began filming children's videos in her basement. The Baby Einstein Company was born, and in just 5 years, her business grew to more than $20 million in sales. November 2001, Julie sold Baby Einstein to Walt Disney Company, and with her help, Baby Einstein has grown into a $200 million business. Julie represents the great enterprising spirit of America, and she's using her success to help others, producing child safety videos with John Walsh of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Julie says of her new project, "I believe it is the most important thing I have ever done. I believe that children have the right to live in a world that is safe." And so tonight, we are pleased to welcome this talented business entrepreneur and generous social entrepreneur, Julie Agner Clark. Three weeks ago, Wesley Autry was waiting at a Harlem subway station with his two little girls when he saw a man fall into the path of a train. With seconds to act, Wesley jumped onto the tracks, pulled the man into the space between the rails, and held him as a love. There is something wonderful about a country that produces a brave and humble man like Wesley Autry. Tommy Riemann was a teenager pumping gas in Independence, Kentucky when he enlisted in the United States Army. In December 2003, he was on a reconnaissance mission in Iraq when his team came under heavy enemy fire. From his Humvee, Sergeant Riemann returned fire. He used his body as a shield to protect his gunner. He was shot in the chest and arm and received shrapnel wounds to his legs, yet he refused medical attention and stayed in the fight. He helped to repel a second attack, firing grenades at the enemy's position. For his exceptional courage, Sergeant Riemann was awarded the Silver Star. And like so many other Americans who have volunteered to defend us, he has earned the respect and the gratitude of our entire country. In such courage and compassion, ladies and gentlemen, we see the spirit and character of America. And these qualities are not in short supply. This is a decent and honorable country, and resilient too. We've been through a lot together. We've met challenges and faced dangers, and we know that more lie ahead. Yet we can go forward with confidence, because the state of our union is strong. Our cause in the world is right, and tonight that cause goes on. God bless.
The State of the Union, strong for wood chips, for women speakers of the House, for agricultural waste. The word Iraqi not appearing until more than 3,200 words into the president's speech. Keith Olbermann alongside Chris Matthews at MSNBC in Washington. It wasn't a particularly bad speech. It wasn't a particularly good speech. What was it?
Well, I think it was workmanlike and a bit of a confection. I did think it opened some doors to get some things done in this country. We'll see if anybody goes through those doors, certainly on health care, certainly on energy, and of course in immigration. He made it very clear he wants to negotiate. He wants to find a negotiating partner up there on Capitol Hill to get those things done. I don't think there's anything new on Iraq except this new bipartisan group, which I'm a little skeptical about. It may just include some hawks on the Democratic side. I was impressed, of course, by the human interest aspects of those last people that he celebrated, including Mr. Autry, the wonderfully courageous fellow that saved that man's life on the New York subway tracks. We have to talk to Hillary Clinton about that later. I thought it was wonderful what he said about malaria, small point, since I got malaria in Zimbabwe a couple of years ago. I'm glad that he's saving people from what's killing now 1 million people a year over there. And I also think it was good that he kept up the work and the attention to the HIV/AIDS challenge in Africa, all good things. Those are new. He rarely mentions them. He did so tonight. But I do think the most important thing wasn't on Iraq tonight. It was open for negotiation on immigration, health care, and energy. We might get something done if both sides want to play ball here.
Do his own people want to play ball on those issues? It did not look like there was extraordinary enthusiasm for many of the remarks about immigration.
Republicans don't want immigration reform. Democrats do. That's going to be one of these questions I've been raising before we watch the president tonight. Will he agree to deals whereby most of his supporters in legislation are Democrats, which would betray the interests of his own base? Will he be willing to do that? I think Tom Brokaw thought he might. I think on the issue of energy, we've got a big intramural fight in the Democratic Party right now with John Dingell from Michigan holding strong for the auto industry. Will we get anywhere on auto emissions with that kind of a stranglehold, perhaps, against a major global warming type initiative? Big questions.
Do you want to take the first stab at trying to translate the references to al-Qaeda being Sunni extremists and the Iranians including Shia extremists? What was that all about?
Well, I think it's extraordinary that he went to the effort to try to explain that there are, in fact, two sectarian groups. The one larger group, Sunnis, which includes al-Qaeda, is a very small piece of all the Sunnis we know. Practically most of the people we know in America who are Muslim or Sunni, and all our friends in the world, from Egypt to Jordan, around the world over there, the Emirates are all Sunnis. The Saudis are largely Sunni, but the largest Shia country, of course, is Iran, which is Persian. And, of course, the president, I thought, was a little strong there, trying to equate Hezbollah as a threat to us, Hezbollah, if you will, to al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda struck us and killed 3,000 people. Hezbollah has been at war with Israel on its northern border and fought it to something of a draw a few months back. But I don't know why he was trying to find equality of enmity there. I don't quite get that.
Tom Brokaw in New York, what is your assessment of that? Why suddenly have we had this specific reference to al-Qaeda and other Sunni extremists, the specific reference to the Iranians as Shia extremists, the specific invocation of Hezbollah?
I think what he wants to do is put pressure on their host countries. He wants to identify them with countries in the Middle East that they would like to step up a little more. It's no secret, for example, that most of the hijackers that attacked this country came from one of our principal allies there, the Saudis. There's a lot of frustration that the Saudi Arabians have not joined in a vigorous way with a larger war on terrorism, and they don't have control yet of their own population. So I think it was a subtle message that he was attempting to send. I was struck by a couple of things that he said about Iraq. He said this is not a fight that we entered, but we're in. A lot of people believe that, in fact, that the American presence there and the failure of the United States to prepare for a post-combat Iraq, in fact, was the principal catalyst for that fight. It was interesting to see him glide over, in a way, the points that he's made about Iraq in the past and the very muted reaction in that chamber, because that is the big issue. That's the 100,000-pound gorilla in American political life today. And it certainly is in the Congress of the United States. As we said before, he appeared, Senator John Warner, prominent Republican, now out with a resolution saying that he ought not to send the extra troops there, but he's fully committed based on what we heard there tonight.
But as we were discussing, Tom, before the speech, if the goal was to bring the heat down a little bit as a domestic issue, did he succeed in doing that by having so much in the speech, by going into almost a laundry list of domestic social issues and immigration reform, as we mentioned, health care, biodiesel fuel, a civil debate on all of this? Was the attempt to lose Iraq in the shuffle to some degree, and was it successful?
I don't think you can be successful, and I think the White House acknowledges that. They felt that they made the big speech 10 days ago on Iraq, and they did want to get these domestic initiatives out there tonight. It's a tricky piece for the Democrats as well, Keith, as you know, because they do have power now through 2008, and the country is going to be looking to them to see what their solutions are to the problems that the president correctly identified tonight. I think that you can give him an A for identifying the priorities that have been before this country for some time and that the Republican-dominated Congress has given very little attention to. Global warming. He used that phrase for the first time since he's been president. I would like to have seen the reaction of James Inhofe, who is the senator from Oklahoma, recently displaced as the chair of the Senate Environmental and Public Works Committee, who believes it's the greatest hoax in the history of mankind. Vice President Cheney is not a believer in global warming, as it has been described by now a consensus of scientists around the country. So the president feels he's got a better shot at gaining some political points for the Democrats than he does with the Republicans on these issues, and especially on immigration. One prominent White House aide said to me today, my father down in Texas has almost stopped talking to me because of our guest worker program and our attempt to find conciliation on immigration. It is a radioactive issue.
Tom, let me ask you about the energy. You're right. I think it's amazing for him to take such a strong position as a Republican, which is generally a pro-business position, to come out to modernize fuel efficiency standards for cars. And yet when he was doing that, when he was going through how tough he's going to get on fuel efficiency and his acknowledgement of the global warming issue, maybe it's a coincidence, maybe I shouldn't be reading this into it, but the vice president seemed to be smiling broadly during that. Did you catch that?
No, I'd be the last person who would try to read Dick Cheney's mind. I do know that they feel that they've set these goals very high. It's a very bold program, and they don't have a lot of confidence that they can achieve the goals that he outlined here today. And the mechanics of how you get there are still to be explained on how they would work that out with Congress. Look, I think in the last 18 months there's been a sea change in this country about alternative energy, about the impact of global warming, not just a scientific consensus, but more grassroots people are signing on to the idea. Mayors across the country are developing their own programs. And just yesterday we saw 10 of the most prominent corporate leaders in America saying, we believe in it and we think that we have to have a national policy. It's also worth noting that the White House has not reached out to those corporate leaders, so far at least, to get their additional thinking on all of this.
Tom, we've got an NBC poll. You've seen the item in it. It's one of the elements was that that the public now believes it's up to Congress to lead the country. Does that, which is sort of like a vote of confidence, if you will, carry with it the problem for the Democrats to have to do something? The president threw some balls into their court, knocked them into their court tonight. One on health care. Let's do something. If it means giving people tax breaks, at least find some way to give them health care. On energy, of course, we talked about it. On immigration, he may have more friends on that side of the aisle than he has on his own. Does it put the pressure on Pelosi to agree to meet somewhere in the middle here?
Well, she's still in charge. I mean, they can initiate legislation in the House, and in the Senate they'll be resolving a lot of these issues. But I think that the Democrats know that with the power that they have been given in this dramatic off-year election, with 2008 coming on very fast, that the country is in an impatient mood. This was not birthright that they were handing over. I think Howard Dean, of all people, said it best, the chair of the Democratic National Committee, when he said, look, the people of this country have rented us Congress for the next 2 years, and they expect some responsible action on our part to address these issues. They're tired of ideological battles. The whole message of the election was get something done and stop this kind of infantile squabbling that has been going on in Washington.
And as we, Tom and Chris, await the formal Democratic response from the new senator from Virginia, Jim Webb, which we'll get in about 2 minutes and change, we have an informal response already from Senator Barack Obama. And it's interesting, these are fairly de rigueur kind of political things in either side of the aisle, but the start of this is worth reading. The president offered some serious proposals tonight on 2 issues, energy and health care, that we all agree must be addressed. I'm glad he did, and I think it's important to respond in a constructive way. So perhaps those 2 things, if nothing else, have registered to some degree on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, you'd think that they would simply have a meeting tomorrow morning and try to hash out the parameters. You know, we agree on this, we can find common ground on that, spend 5 or 6 hours together and get the ball rolling. But of course, everybody will retreat to their corner and begin the delay game of making sure the other side takes most of the heat.
Right.
For whatever is done.
And the rest of the Obama statement pretty much is about Iraq and referencing political sound bites. So
Tom, there's a wonderfully chivalrous moment there, I thought, in the beginning, where the president paid real tribute to Nancy Pelosi, and I guess by inference to her gender, for this milestone of becoming the first speaker.
Yes, I tried to allude to that as we were waiting to hear from the president, because White House aides today made it very clear that there was going to be what you could probably describe as the best of George Bush when he is in his personal, I'm just a guy from Texas mode. He's at his most effective, and that appeared to be a genuine expression on his part of congratulations to her, even though I know that they have, and everyone else does as well, they have very strong ideological differences. They've been very tough on each other. But at that moment, Barbara Bush's son turned to the speaker and congratulated her in that quite gracious fashion.
Perhaps not that level of graciousness expected in the Democratic formal response from the new senator from Virginia, Jim Webb, after that most contentious campaign in Virginia in which he defeated the incumbent George Allen. Senator Webb being chosen in just his first month in the Senate to give the Democratic response, which is coming from Washington in a matter of seconds. Here is Senator Webb, Virginia.
Good evening. I'm Senator Jim Webb from Virginia, where this year we will celebrate the 400th anniversary of the settlement of Jamestown, an event that marked the first step in the long journey that has made us the greatest and most prosperous nation on earth. It wouldn't be possible in this short amount of time to actually rebut the president's message, nor would it be useful. Let me simply say that we in the Democratic Party hope that this administration is serious about improving education and health care for all Americans, and addressing such domestic priorities as restoring the vitality of the great city of New Orleans. Further, this is the 7th time the President has mentioned energy independence in his State of the Union message, but for the first time, this exchange is taking place in a Congress led by the Democratic Party. We are looking for affirmative solutions that will strengthen our nation by freeing us from our dependence on foreign oil and spurring a wave of entrepreneurial growth in the form of alternate energy programs. We look forward to working with the President and his party to bring about these changes. There are 2 areas where our respective parties have largely stood in contradiction, and I want to take a few minutes to address them tonight. The first relates to how we see the health of our economy, how we measure it, and how we ensure that its benefits are properly shared among all Americans. The second regards our foreign policy, how we might bring the war in Iraq to a proper conclusion that will also allow us to continue to fight the war against international terrorism and to address other strategic concerns that our country faces around the world. When one looks at the health of our economy, it's almost as if we're living in 2 different countries. Some say that things have never been better. The stock market is at an all-time high, and so are corporate profits. But these benefits are not being fairly shared. When I graduated from college, the average corporate CEO made 20 times what the average worker did. Today, it's nearly 400 times. In other words, it takes the average worker more than a year to make the money that his or her boss makes in one day. Wages and salaries for our workers are at all-time lows as a percentage of national wealth, even though the productivity of American workers is the highest in the world. Medical costs have skyrocketed. College tuition rates are off the charts. Our manufacturing base is being dismantled and sent overseas. Good American jobs are being sent along with them. In short, the middle class of this country, our historic backbone, and our best hope for a strong society in the future is losing its place at the table. Our workers know this through painful experience. Our white-collar professionals are beginning to understand it as their jobs start disappearing also. And they expect, rightly, that in this age of globalization, their government has a duty to insist that their concerns be dealt with fairly in the international marketplace. In the early days of our republic, President Andrew Jackson established an important principle of American-style democracy, that we should measure the health of our society not at its apex, but at its base, not with the numbers that come out of Wall Street, but with the living conditions that exist on Main Street. We must recapture that spirit today. Under the leadership of the new Democratic Congress, we're on our way to doing so. The House just passed a minimum wage increase, the first in 10 years, and the Senate will soon follow. We've introduced a broad legislative package designed to regain the trust of the American people. We've established a tone of cooperation and consensus that extends beyond party lines. We're working to get the right things done for the right people and for the right reasons. With respect to foreign policy, this country has patiently endured a mismanaged war for nearly 4 years. Many, including myself, warned even before the war began that it was unnecessary, that it would take our energy and attention away from the larger war against terrorism, and that invading and occupying Iraq would leave us strategically vulnerable in the most violent and turbulent corner of the world. I want to share with all of you a picture that I have carried with me for more than 50 years. This is my father when he was a young Air Force captain flying cargo planes during the Berlin airlift. He sent us the picture from Germany as we waited for him back here at home. When I was a small boy, I used to take the picture to bed with me every night because for more than 3 years my father was deployed, unable to live with us full-time, serving overseas or in bases where there was no family housing. I still keep it to remind me of the sacrifices that my mother and others had to make over and over again as my father gladly served our country. I was proud to follow in his footsteps, serving as a Marine in Vietnam. My brother did as well, serving as a Marine helicopter pilot. My son has joined the tradition, now serving as an infantry Marine in Iraq. Like so many other Americans today and throughout our history, we served and have served not for political reasons, but because we love our country. On the political issues, those matters of war and peace, and in some cases life and death, we trusted the judgment of our national leaders. We hoped that they would be right, that they would measure with accuracy the value of our lives against the enormity of the national interest that might call upon us to go into harm's way. We owed them our loyalty as Americans, and we gave it. But they owed us sound judgment, clear thinking, concern for our welfare, a guarantee that the threat to our country was equal to the price we might be called upon to pay in defending it. The President took us into this war recklessly. He disregarded warnings from the National Security Advisor during the first Gulf War, the Chief of Staff of the Army, 2 former commanding generals of Central Command, whose jurisdiction includes Iraq, the Director of Operations on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and many, many others with great integrity and long experience in national security affairs. We are now, as a nation, held hostage to the predictable and predicted disarray that has followed. The worst costs to our nation have been staggering financially, the damage to our reputation around the world, the lost opportunities to defeat the forces of international terrorism, and especially the precious blood of our citizens who stepped forward to serve. The majority of the nation no longer supports this war, the way this war is being fought, nor does the majority of our military, nor does the majority of Congress. We need a new direction. Not one step back from the war against international terrorism, not a precipitous withdrawal that ignores the possibility of further chaos, but an immediate shift towards strong, regionally based diplomacy, a policy that takes our soldiers off the streets of Iraq cities, and a formula that will, in short order, allow our combat forces to leave Iraq. On both of these vital issues, our economy and our national security, it falls upon those of us in elected office to take action. Regarding the economic imbalance in our country, I'm reminded of the situation President Theodore Roosevelt faced in the early days of the 20th century. America was then, as now, drifting apart along class lines. The so-called robber barons were unapologetically raking in a huge percentage of the national wealth. The dispossessed workers at the bottom were threatening revolt. Roosevelt spoke strongly against these divisions. He told his fellow Republicans that they must set themselves, quote, as resolutely against improper corporate influence on the one hand as against demagogy and mob rule on the other. And he did something about it. As I look at Iraq, I recall the words of former General and soon-to-be President Dwight Eisenhower during the dark days of the Korean War, which had fallen to a bloody stalemate. When comes the end? Asked the general who had commanded our forces in Europe during World War II. And as soon as he became president, he brought the Korean War to an end. These presidents took the right kind of action for the benefit of the American people and for the health of our relations around the world. Tonight, we're calling on this president to take similar action in both areas. If he does, we will join him. If he does not, we will be showing him the way. Thank you for listening, and God bless America.
Well, that was Jim Webb, the new senator from Virginia. And for those who doubt when they go to vote that elections matter, that election in Virginia mattered because that man was able to speak tonight on what I counted now 8 TV networks, all simultaneously. We used to call that a roadblock in the old days. He has reached a lot of people with the message of a man who's the son of a fighting man and the father of one as well, who's the father of a son who's fighting over in harm's way right now. I thought it was one of the rare moments the Democratic Party showed tremendous discretion in picking someone who may not be the most liberal member of the Democratic caucus, who may not even be a liberal, but who certainly carries the rank, the political rank of someone who has faced the enemy and whose children are willing to face the enemy up against a president and a vice president who have avoided the same kind of experience rather deliberately. And it's an amazing piece of work as a counter demonstration of what Democrats, certainly not all Democrats, but that Democratic family, the Webb family, was willing to give to their country.
No accident, I'm sure, that Senator Webb invoked 3 presidents: Eisenhower, Republican; Teddy Roosevelt, Republican; and Andrew Jackson, of course, founder of the
Of course, he
Democratic
was Ronald
Party,
Reagan's Secretary of
Indeed.
Navy. He is not a lefty Democrat by any means. He's a man of the middle, and we're going to see perhaps the Democrats smart enough to put the middle out front. But I'll tell you, the man's bearing, he looked like a military man. He acted like a military man tonight, and he almost gave us a briefing rather than a speech, which I thought may be just the right cut you want tonight.
But your point about going to the middle, there was a lot, certainly in the State of the Union, Mr. Bush's remarks, that was an attempt to get towards the middle. There are compliments that have been issued already. Senator Kennedy is quoted as saying a vision of comprehensive immigration reform that includes genuine enforcement of immigration laws, commending. We can agree with the principles of the president. Yeah. There seems to be an attempt here to rush as a brand name towards the middle.
Okay, that said, this may be the first time since 1970 when Ed Muskie was over to overwhelm the performance by Richard Nixon before an election, where I think the opposition may have gotten the upper hand. We'll go to Tom Brokaw for a verdict on that. Did the Democrats get the right note tonight, Tom?
Well, I think so. I think Jim Webb is one of the truly fascinating new members of the Senate of the United States. A year ago, we were both in Vietnam, retracing his days there for a book that I'm writing. I didn't know him all that well, but we spent a lot of time together. He had not yet made up his mind as to whether he was going to run against George Allen, but he was so motivated by what he described even then, as he did in this text tonight, the reckless decision, as he described it, of the president to take us to war. He is a former Secretary of the Navy in the Reagan administration, a heavily decorated Marine in Vietnam, a graduate of Annapolis, great rival of Oliver North, and tonight he did, in spare language, delineate the differences between the Democratic Party and this administration. He also made one reference in the course of his discussion about Iraq that is causing some concern among members of the Iraq study group, and that is the almost total absence of attention to any idea of diplomacy in trying to resolve what is going on in that part of the world. That was a very strong element in the Iraq study group's recommendations, and that has been completely set aside by this administration. Almost no discussion of diplomacy, although the president did talk about the Civilian Reserve Corps, which could do the work of winning hearts and minds. At any rate, Jim Webb is going to be a real force in the Senate. He's a very thoughtful man, a graduate of Georgetown Law School, and he's studied over the years national security issues.
Looks pretty happy. She's doing the job. She's very much in red. You know, it's interesting. Ever since Nancy Reagan, the willingness or the readiness of women to wear these bright, look at it right now. There's a wonderful look as we go in there. All the red there, that's people who want to get on television tonight. And you see the woman out there in the gallery, the First Lady, of course, with the red. Ironic. So much red.
And ironic, the meaning of red, of course, in our 21st century politics, there's a lot less red in the chamber than there was the last time we had one of these.
What did you mean by that?
The symbolic red. Now that we have a Democratic control.
Oh, that's right. How did the Democrats ever get blue, which is the most desirable color to get in a country that's still in the aftermath of the Cold War?
This has been studied at length, as you know. There are people getting PhDs somewhere trying to figure out exactly when it turned. And we've got 4 Supreme Court justices tonight.
John Roberts, the chief.
In full regalia.
Kennedy and Breyer and Alito. And that other fellow I don't think is a Supreme Court judge.
If he is, he did not get a robe.
He didn't get the name brand. This is really great. You know, Steve Breyer, who was down there this weekend with the Carter reunion, he was a former staffer on the Hill. And one of the reasons he comes regularly to these occasions, and they all choose to come, is because of his loyalty to the legislative branch of government, which is a good thing to be loyal to, in fact, under our Constitution.
Madam Speaker, the President's Cabinet.
And as the cabinet enters, we are delighted to be joined, as we see Secretary Rice leading the crew, by the anchor emeritus of NBC Nightly News, our esteemed colleague, Tom Brokaw, who's at headquarters in New York. Tom, can you recall the circumstances under which, since certainly the Clinton time, when we've had a more bizarre set of symbols and a more fractious set of political circumstances around a State of the Union address?
Well, Keith, you have to remember that I was White House correspondent during Watergate. That was a pretty traumatic time for the president at that time, Richard Nixon, and a very hostile Congress dominated by the Democrats then as well. Jimmy Carter had some difficult times during the capture of the American hostages in Iran, when he had an energy crisis that was not getting solved. So every president at one time or another has had a difficult time, but this president has had 6 State of the Unions in a row in which he's had the home field advantage. Tonight he enters this arena, and it's not his home field. It's dominated, as you have been saying all night long, by the opposition. And at the same time, based on what we know he's going to talk about tonight, one of his principal problems will be on the Republican side of the aisle, because he's going to talk about some issues tonight, and in a way that a lot of Republicans are not happy, including immigration and energy, certainly. But the dark cloud hanging over this arena tonight will be Iraq, not just in that hall, but outside the hall as well. The president is coming in here in his penultimate State of the Union address with a 2-to-1 disadvantage in the polls. That's tough to overcome with just one speech.
Tom, what did you make of the fact that John McCain, the man who many people believe is the best bet to replace the president, directing his attack personally in a new article today in the press today, that the vice president, he said, is guilty of giving the president a witch's brew of bad advice. He's holding Cheney accountable for being the bad consigliere to the president with regard to the war.
Well, I think it's a commentary. This comes from within the Republican Party, but it's a commentary on the kind of difficult task that the president has before him with 2 more years to run. He's got a Congress dominated by the Democrats. He's got a lot of Republicans who are now running to save their own life, not just presidential candidates, but more than 20 senators who will be up for election in '08 as well. It's unfair to call him a lame duck at this stage, but he's been winged severely as he comes into this hall and tries to make his presidency fly again.
How much of a bump can he get? Can he, first of all, even more preliminary to that, Tom, can he change the subject from Iraq, at least on the front pages and on, for example, the Today Show tomorrow? Can he shift the public topic?
I don't think that he can. I think when you're spending American blood and treasure in a war that has not gone well, even by the White House admission, by the president's own admission, that will be a constant presence in this chamber tonight. Some of the initiatives that he will talk about, global warming will be mentioned for the first time in the 7 years that he's been there. That will get some encouraging reception, my guess is, from the Democrats and across this country. But the big issue remains Iraq, Iraq, Iraq. And especially, I think it might have been a kind of a tipping point this week when Senator John Warner, no one with better Republican credentials than he has, the former chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, had a bipartisan alliance that he went public with to introduce a resolution being very critical of the president's plan to add extra troops.
President will be in a moment, of course, introduced by the Sergeant at Arms of the House. Tom, can anything get done in this country if Iraq is not going to be addressed and resolved to some degree?
Oh, I think that the White House, somebody at the White House said today, we have a better shot at getting an immigration bill through with the Democrats in charge than we did with the Republicans. That may happen. The Democrats also recognize that they can't sit on their hands when it comes to health care. When I asked a very prominent Democrat today whether the president's plan for moving some taxes around as a way to address health care was a non-starter, he said, no, it's not a non-starter. This is what they're doing in the states. We just like to have more of the needs of the very poor people in this country addressed. So I do think on health care, on energy, and on immigration, there's a chance that something may get done in the next 2 years because the Democrats can't be a do-nothing Congress either as they go into 2008.
Let me ask you about the strategy here. Can the president govern?
Tonight as Speaker of the House of Representatives. Congratulations, Madam Speaker. Congratulations. Two members of the House and Senate are now with us tonight, and we pray for the recovery and speedy return of Senator Tim Johnson and Congressman Charlie Norwood. Madam Speaker, Vice President Cheney, members of Congress, distinguished guests, and fellow citizens, the rite of custom brings us together at a defining hour when decisions are hard and courage is needed. We enter the year 2007 with large endeavors underway and others that are ours to begin. In all of this, much is asked of us. We must have the will to face difficult challenges and determined enemies, and the wisdom to face them together. Some in this chamber are new to the House and the Senate, and I congratulate the Democrat majority. Congress has changed, but not our responsibilities. Each of us is guided by our own convictions, and to these we must stay faithful. Yet we're all held to the same standards and called to serve the same good purposes, to extend this nation's prosperity, to spend the people's money wisely, to solve problems, not leave them to future generations, to guard America against all evil, and to keep faith with those we have sent forth to defend us. We're not the first to come here with a government divided and uncertainty in the air. Like many before us, we can work through our differences, and we can achieve big things for the American people. Our citizens don't much care which side of the aisle we sit on, as long as we're willing to cross that aisle when there's work to be done. Our job is to make life better for our fellow Americans and to help them build a future of hope and opportunity, and this is the business before us tonight. A future of hope and opportunity begins with a
Chris. Mr. Boehner suggested this week we needed a committee not unlike what Abraham Lincoln faced during the Civil War, a committee on the conduct of the war with the president to report every 30 days on the progress of events.
You know, you must wonder watching this, does the president only see these people once a year? It looks like high school kids greeting each other at their favorite summer resort, as if they hadn't seen each other in years or months, when in fact he does business with a lot of these folks, obviously the cabinet members, on a weekly or daily basis. There it is, that great picture, the Vice President of the United States, the Speaker of the House, different parties, different genders, different apparel, obviously. So much a contrast.
And that historic handshake, Tom, there it is, the woman Speaker of the House. Extraordinary moment, is it not?
What's he thinking?
How you doing? Thank you. Ready to go?
Welcome, Mr. President. I am.
Very good.
Members of Congress, I have the high privilege and the distinct honor of presenting to you the President of the United States.
Thank you, Peter. Go ahead. Thank you very much. And tonight I have the high privilege and distinct honor of my own as the first president to begin the State of the Union message with these words: Madam Speaker. In his day, the late Congressman Thomas D'Alessandro Jr. from Baltimore, Maryland, saw Presidents Roosevelt and Truman at this rostrum. But nothing could compare with the sight of his only daughter, Nancy.
Using a majority of Democrats, or does he get required at some point to win over a majority of his own congressional colleagues? For example, can he put an immigration bill together, which largely depends on a majority of Democrats who are more liberal on the issue and skirts around the more conservative Republican caucus?
Yeah, I think that he can. Again, talking to some of the Democrats on the Hill today, one of the areas in which they think they can work with him is on reforming No Child Left Behind. They believe that he's generally right with his goals in reforming American public education, but now after 7 years they agree that it does need some reforms, some retooling, if you will, and they think that they can work with him on that. So there are a number of issues that he probably can find some common ground with the Democrats on, but I dare say stylistically and tonally the White House is going to have to change, and I think you should look for that at the beginning tonight. The president's demeanor and how he acknowledges the new Speaker of the House, his whole change. In the past, it's been pretty much I talk, you listen, because he had a captive Congress, if you will.
Madam Speaker.
Here now is the president.
The President of the United States.
The people you'll notice who are greeting the president most effusively have waited for hours in many cases to claim those very privileged seats right along the aisle there. This isn't by accident that these people are the ones who get on national television now to embrace the president.
And what we were able to eavesdrop on from one of them, as you heard, I'm sure, as we see the president greeting Mrs. Dole, saying a prayer for your success. That might be metaphoric. Minority Leader Boehner, just behind the president, has not been his best friend this week. Perhaps that's symbolic, too. We're looking for images like we're casting a Hollywood picture.